From a 9-month-old baby who was made to scream, to monkeys sealed inside a box, to a boy who was raised as a girl, just to prove a theory. We're covering the most horrifying, unethical psychological experiments in the history of mankind. And every single one of these was funded, approved, published in journals, taught to students. Some of it won awards. So how does that happen? Who looks at a room full of orphans and sees a data set, and who signs the check? The answer starts here. For most of the 20th century, psychology had almost no rules. If you had a university office and an idea, you could test it on almost anyone. Children, prisoners, orphans, soldiers, people who had no idea they were being studied at all. Some of those experiments taught us things we genuinely needed to know. Some of them destroyed the people inside them. Today, every one of these is illegal. Ethics boards exist because of what you're about to see. Number 8. The one you might have been in. In January 2012, Facebook quietly altered the news feeds of 689,000 users. Some people were shown fewer positive posts. Others were shown fewer negative ones. Then researchers measured what those users wrote afterwards. The result? People fed negative content posted more negative things themselves. Emotions spread through a network like a cold spreads through an office. They called it emotional contagion. Here's the problem. Nobody was asked. Nobody was told. 600,000 people had their mood deliberately manipulated, and the only consent involved was a terms of service checkbox they'd clicked years earlier. When the study was published in 2014, the backlash was immediate, but the experiment had already happened. And it worked. That's number 8. It gets worse. Number 7. A perfect world. John Calhoun didn't want to hurt anyone. He wanted to build heaven. In 1968, at the National Institute of Mental Health, he constructed a perfect enclosure for mice. Unlimited food, unlimited water, no predators, no disease, no winter. He called it a utopia, and he put in 8 mice. The population doubled every 55 days. By 1970, there were more than 2,000. Then something broke. Mothers stopped caring for their young. Males stopped competing, stopped mating, stopped defending territory. A group emerged that Calhoun named the beautiful ones, mice that did nothing but eat, sleep, and groom themselves. Perfect coats. Zero behavior. The last conception happened in 1972. By 1973, every mouse was dead. In a world with no scarcity and no danger, they had simply stopped being mice. Calhoun ran it 25 times. It ended the same way every time. Number 6. The pit of despair. Harry Harlow wanted to prove that love was real. In the 50s, mainstream psychology taught that affection was unnecessary, that babies bonded with mothers only for food. Harlow disagreed, so he took infant rhesus monkeys from their mothers and gave them 2 replacements, a wire frame that dispensed milk and a soft cloth shape that gave nothing. The babies chose the cloth, every time. They clung to comfort and left the food behind. It was a landmark finding. It changed how orphanages and hospitals treated children worldwide. But Harlow kept going. He built an isolation chamber, a smooth-sided steel enclosure with no light and no contact. He put young monkeys inside for months, some for a full year. He named it, in his own writing, the pit of despair. The monkeys that came out were permanently broken. They rocked. They self-harmed. They couldn't socialize, couldn't mate, couldn't parent. Harlow proved love matters by removing it completely. His lab is one of the reasons the animal rights movement exists at all. Number 5. 450 volts. 3 months after Adolf Eichmann went on trial for organizing the Holocaust, Stanley Milgram put an advert in a New Haven newspaper. Volunteers were told they were studying memory. Each one was seated at a machine with 30 switches, labeled from 15 volts up to 450. In the next room, a man was strapped to a chair. For every wrong answer, the volunteer flipped the next switch. At 150 volts, the man begged to stop. At 200, he screamed. At 330, he went silent. When volunteers hesitated, a man in a gray lab coat said 4 words. "The experiment requires you to continue." 65% of them went all the way to 450 volts. The man in the chair was an actor. He was never shocked, but the volunteers didn't know that, and many left convinced they had just killed a stranger because someone in a lab coat told them to. Milgram never warned them. Some weren't debriefed for months. Number 4. The basement. Philip Zimbardo took 24 ordinary students, flipped a coin, and made half of them guards. The basement of Stanford's psychology building became a prison. Prisoners got numbers instead of names. Guards got uniforms, batons, and mirrored sunglasses. Within 36 hours, the first prisoner had a breakdown. Guards were forcing push-ups, confiscating mattresses, using solitary confinement. It was planned for 2 weeks. Zimbardo shut it down after 6 days, and only because his girlfriend visited and told him what he'd become. For 50 years, this was taught as proof that ordinary people turn cruel when you hand them power. Then the archived tapes were released. Zimbardo had coached the guards. He'd told them to be tough. One of the most famous breakdowns was later admitted to be acting. The experiment that supposedly revealed human nature had been directed, like a film, which raises a harder question. It wasn't the prisoners who invented that basement. It was the psychologist. Number 3. The baby. John Watson wanted to prove that fear was learned, not born. He needed a baby. He found one, a 9-month-old at Johns Hopkins, known in the literature only as Albert. Watson showed him a white rat. Albert was curious. He reached for it. So Watson waited until the baby touched the rat, then struck a steel bar with a hammer directly behind his head. And again. Within weeks, the rat alone made Albert scream and crawl away. Then the fear spread to a rabbit, a dog, a fur coat, a Santa Claus mask, anything soft and white. Watson had built a phobia from nothing, in an infant in under 2 months. He never undid it. The baby's mother removed him from the hospital before any attempt was made, and Watson published anyway. We still don't know for certain who Albert was. The leading candidate is a boy named Douglas who was neurologically impaired and who died at the age of 6. Number 2. The monster study. Wendell Johnson stuttered. He believed stuttering wasn't a defect you were born with. It was created by adults labeling a child as a stutterer and the child believing it. To test that, he needed children who spoke perfectly fine. He sent his graduate student, Mary Tudor, to an orphanage in Davenport, Iowa. 22 children were selected. Half were given praise. The other half were told repeatedly over 5 months that their speech was wrong, that they were beginning to stutter, that they should stop talking until they could speak correctly. They didn't stutter. They had never stuttered. They stopped talking. Their schoolwork collapsed. Some withdrew almost entirely. Several carried speech anxiety and self-consciousness for the rest of their lives. Tudor returned to the orphanage afterwards on her own, trying to reverse it. It didn't work. Johnson never published the study. His own colleagues named it the Monster Study. It stayed hidden until a newspaper uncovered it in 2001, 62 years later. In 2007, the state of Iowa paid the survivors $925,000. And number 1. In 1966, a Canadian couple took their 8-month-old twin sons in for a routine circumcision. An electrical device was used. One of the boys, Bruce, was catastrophically injured. His parents saw a psychologist named John Money on television. Money believed gender identity was entirely learned, that a child raised as a girl would simply become one. Bruce was, in his view, the perfect test. An injured boy with an identical twin as a control group, a natural experiment that could never be arranged on purpose. Surgery was performed. Bruce became Brenda. The parents were instructed never to tell either child the truth. For over a decade, the twins returned to Money's clinic annually. What happened in those sessions has been documented by both brothers, and it was not therapy. They were made to participate in sessions both later described as abuse. They begged their parents not to go back. Money published the case as a complete success. It became textbook evidence worldwide that gender is taught rather than innate. It was false. Brenda had never adjusted. At 14, after refusing further treatment, the truth finally came out. She transitioned back, took the name David, married, and in 1997 went public to stop the case being cited as proof of anything. His twin brother Brian died of an overdose in 2002. David Reimer took his own life in 2004. He was 38. Here's the uncomfortable part. Almost every experiment on this list produced real knowledge. We understand attachment because of Harlow. We understand obedience because of Milgram. We understand conditioned fear because of Watson. The rules we have now, informed consent, ethics boards, the right to walk out, weren't invented by careful people ahead of time. They were written afterwards by people cleaning up. Every single protection exists because somebody was already harmed, which leaves one question worth sitting with. Right now, somewhere, there is research being done that we consider completely normal. In 60 years, which one of those is on this list?